I raised my daughters alone for 15 years, and what they said left me crushed. Standing in my kitchen on their 18th birthday, Emma looked me straight in the eyes and said, "We've decided to move in with Mom permanently. You've done enough damage already." Her twin sister Grace nodded in agreement. "Mom says you've been manipulating us our whole lives to turn us against her." My name is David, and I thought I knew what heartbreak felt like when my ex-wife Michelle left us when the girls were 3 years old. But nothing prepared me for the moment my own daughters, the ones I'd sacrificed everything for, accused me of being the villain in their story. Before that devastating birthday morning, I believed we had an unbreakable bond. I'd been both mother and father to Emma and Grace since Michelle walked out, claiming she wasn't ready for the responsibility of motherhood and needed to find herself. She'd moved across the country to California, sending birthday cards twice a year and calling maybe once a month. For 15 years, I'd built my entire life around those girls. I turned down promotions that required travel, worked from home whenever possible, and scheduled my whole existence around their needs. Every soccer game, every school play, every sleepless night when they were sick, it had always been just the three of us against the world. I'd worked 2 jobs to afford their private school tuition, driving for Uber late at night after my day job as an accountant. My social life had disappeared completely. Friends stopped inviting me out because I always had to decline. Dating was impossible because every spare moment went to Emma and Grace. The house we lived in was modest, a 3-bedroom ranch that I'd bought specifically because it was in the best school district I could afford. My bedroom was the smallest, while each girl had her own space decorated exactly how she wanted. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic because every extra dollar went toward their future. I'd started a college fund the day Michelle left, contributing religiously even when money was tight. By their 18th birthday, I'd managed to save $127,000 split between 2 accounts. Not enough for everything they'd need, but a solid foundation for their education. The girls had always been my pride and joy. Emma was the academic achiever, maintaining a 4.2 GPA while participating in debate team and student government. Grace was the creative one, winning art competitions and already accepted to a prestigious design program. They were everything I'd hoped they'd become. But 6 months before their 18th birthday, something changed. Michelle had started calling more frequently, and the girls began taking these calls in private. They'd whisper together, stopping conversations when I entered the room. Their attitudes toward me shifted from loving appreciation to cool distance. "Dad, why didn't you ever tell us about the child support?" Emma asked one evening during dinner. I was confused. "What child support?" Grace looked at me with disappointment. "Mom says you've been getting money from her for years, but told us she abandoned us financially too." That was the first lie, but I didn't realize it yet. I explained that Michelle had never paid a cent of court-ordered child support, showing them the legal documents and my attempts to collect through the state system. They seemed to accept this, but I noticed they still looked skeptical. The phone calls from Michelle increased to daily conversations. The girls started questioning everything about our life together. Why did we live in such a small house when Mom's place in California looked so nice in photos? Why did I work so much if I really cared about them? Why hadn't I encouraged them to visit their mother more often? "Mom says you probably told the court she was an unfit mother to get full custody," Grace mentioned casually one afternoon. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I'd never said anything negative about Michelle in front of the girls, despite how much her abandonment had hurt all of us. I showed them the original custody agreement, where Michelle had voluntarily signed over full custody because she couldn't handle the stress of raising children. But somehow, even documented proof wasn't enough anymore. They'd look at the papers and then exchange glances that suggested they thought I'd somehow manipulated the situation. 2 weeks before their birthday, Michelle called me directly for the first time in 3 years. "I want the girls to come live with me in California," she announced without preamble. "They're adults now, and they deserve to know their mother." Her voice carried an arrogance that made my blood boil. "They've always been free to visit you," I replied carefully. "But they've built their whole lives here. Emma's starting college in the fall, and Grace has her art program." Michelle laughed coldly. "David, you've kept them prisoner in that little house, working yourself to death to make them feel guilty for existing. I'm offering them freedom." That conversation revealed Michelle's strategy. She'd been systematically rewriting our history, painting me as the controlling villain who'd stolen her children and poisoned them against her. Every sacrifice I'd made was reframed as manipulation. Every choice to prioritize their needs over mine was presented as emotional blackmail. The girls started staying out later, claiming they were with friends but being vague about details. Their grades didn't slip, but their warmth toward me continued cooling. They'd answer my questions with minimal responses and spend most of their time locked in their rooms on video calls. Dad, we need to talk about college, Emma said one evening, her tone formal like we were strangers. Grace and I have been thinking, and we want to transfer to schools in California. Mom says she can help us get in-state tuition since we'll be living with her. My heart sank. But you've already been accepted here. Emma, you got that scholarship to state. Grace, your art program here is exactly what you wanted. They looked at each other with that new expression I'd come to dread, the look that said I just didn't understand. Mom says you've been limiting our options our whole lives, Grace replied. Maybe it's time we made our own choices without your input. The dismissive way she said, your input, felt like a knife in my chest. I tried to reason with them, explaining the financial implications of out-of-state tuition and starting over at new schools. I reminded them of their friends, their established lives here, the opportunities they'd be giving up. But every practical concern I raised was met with accusations that I was trying to control them. See? This is exactly what Mom warned us about, Emma said coldly. You're making everything about money and logistics because you don't want us to be happy. The irony was devastating. For 15 years, I'd made everything about their happiness at the expense of my own. 3 days before their 18th birthday, I discovered they'd been secretly planning their move for months. I found printed emails about apartment deposits in California, job applications, and college transfer paperwork. They'd been living double lives, preparing to leave while pretending everything was normal. When I confronted them about the hidden planning, their response shocked me. We didn't tell you because we knew you'd try to sabotage it, Grace said matter-of-factly. Mom explained how you've spent our whole lives making sure we'd be too dependent on you to leave. That night, I called my sister Jennifer, the only family member who'd supported me through Michelle's abandonment and the years of single parenting that followed. I told her about the girls' accusations and their plans to move across the country. David, you need to prepare yourself, Jennifer said gently. Michelle isn't just trying to reconnect with the girls. She's trying to rewrite history so she's the victim and you're the villain. The timing isn't coincidental. They're about to be legal adults with access to their college funds. That possibility hadn't occurred to me, but Jennifer's words made terrible sense. Michelle had been absent for 15 years, contributing nothing financially or emotionally. Now suddenly she wanted to be Mother of the Year, right when the girls were about to access significant money and make major life decisions. I spent that night going through old documents, looking for patterns I'd missed. Michelle's rare phone calls had increased dramatically once the girls started their senior year and college planning began. Her sudden interest in their lives coincided perfectly with their upcoming financial independence. The morning of their 18th birthday, I'd planned a special breakfast and had their gifts wrapped, keys to a used car they'd share and the first installments of their college funds. Instead, I walked into the kitchen to find them sitting at the table with packed suitcases beside their chairs. We're leaving today, Emma announced without looking at me. Mom booked us flights to California. We'll send for the rest of our stuff later. Grace added, we think it's better if we don't have a big dramatic goodbye scene. I stood there holding their birthday gifts, feeling like my world was ending. Today? But we had plans. It's your birthday. Emma finally looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, complete indifference mixed with mild irritation. Dad, we're adults now. We can make our own decisions about how to spend our birthday. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Grace continued, Mom says the longer we wait, the harder you'll make it for everyone. That's when Emma delivered the words that shattered me completely. We've decided to move in with Mom permanently. You've done enough damage already. Mom says you've been manipulating us our whole lives to turn us against her. I tried to speak, to defend myself, to remind them of our 15 years together. But Grace cut me off. We know you think you've been a good father, but Mom helped us understand how unhealthy our relationship really was. The codependency, the guilt trips, the way you made everything about your sacrifices. Every word felt like a physical blow. These were my daughters, the children I devoted my life to, and they were speaking to me like I was a stranger they'd grown tired of humoring. The worst part was how calm they seemed, as if they'd rehearsed this conversation multiple times. What about college? Your funds, your plans here? I managed to ask through the pain. Emma shrugged. Mom says there are better opportunities in California. Besides, we need to become independent from your financial control. I realized then that Michelle had convinced them that accepting support from me was somehow unhealthy or manipulative. The college funds I'd built through 15 years of sacrifice were now being reframed as tools of control rather than expressions of love. They called their Uber while I stood frozen in the kitchen, still holding their unopened birthday gifts. Grace glanced back once as they loaded their suitcases, and for a moment, I thought I saw uncertainty in her eyes. But Emma said something to her sister, and whatever doubt might have existed vanished. We'll call you when we're settled, Emma said from the doorway, though her tone suggested this was more politeness than genuine intention. And then they were gone, leaving me alone in the house I'd filled with their childhood memories. I sat at the kitchen table for hours after they left, surrounded by birthday decorations I'd put up the night before. The car keys and college fund checks lay untouched beside their uneaten breakfast. Everything I'd planned, everything I'd worked toward, had become meaningless in a single morning. The first week after they left was the darkest period of my life. I called in sick to work and barely left the house. Their empty bedrooms felt like monuments to my failure. I kept expecting them to call, to realize they'd made a mistake, to come home. But the silence stretched on. When they finally did call, 2 weeks later, it was worse than the silence. "We're doing great," Emma reported with artificial cheerfulness. "Mom was right, we needed to get away from that environment to see how unhealthy it was." Grace added, "We're already looking at colleges here. Mom knows someone who can help us get scholarships." They spoke to me like I was a distant relative they were obligated to update, not the father who'd raised them alone for 15 years. When I tried to express how much I missed them, Emma cut the conversation short. "Dad, we need space to process our childhood trauma. Our therapist says contact with you should be limited for now." Therapist. Michelle had them in therapy within 2 weeks of their arrival, undoubtedly reinforcing the narrative that I was the problem. The irony was crushing. I'd paid for their therapy sessions throughout high school when Grace struggled with anxiety, but now therapy was being used as a we*P*N against me. 3 months passed with minimal contact. Occasionally, one of them would text brief updates about school or work, but any attempt at meaningful conversation was shut down. They'd blocked me on social media, cutting off my ability to see how they were actually doing. My sister Jennifer visited regularly during those months, worried about my depression. "You gave them everything," she reminded me during one of our conversations. "Their ingratitude doesn't diminish what you did. They'll realize it eventually." But I wasn't sure they would. Michelle was clearly invested in maintaining the lie that painted her as the victim and me as the villain. She had motivation to keep them alienated from me, not just emotional satisfaction from her revenge, but practical benefits from having 2 young adults who saw her as their savior. 6 months after they left, I received a phone call that changed everything. It was Emma, but she sounded different, younger, uncertain. "Dad, can we talk?" Her voice carried none of the cold confidence from our recent conversations. "Of course," I said, trying to keep my own voice steady. "Is everything okay?" There was a long pause, and then Emma started crying. "Dad, I think we made a mistake. Mom isn't who we thought she was." The story that emerged over the next hour was devastating. Michelle had indeed been using the girls, but not in the way I'd suspected. She wasn't after their college money, she was after something much more valuable to her. Social media sympathy and attention. "She's been posting about being a reunited mother online," Emma explained through tears. "She tells everyone about how she fought for years to get her daughters back from their controlling father. She's got thousands of followers now, and she's even started a blog about maternal alienation." Grace had apparently discovered their mother's true motivations when she accidentally saw Michelle's laptop open to a draft blog post titled, "How I Rescued My Daughters from Their Narcissistic Father." The post detailed fabricated stories about my supposed abuse and control, turning their childhood memories into content for Michelle's growing online platform. "She's been using our private conversations for her blog." Grace's voice came through the speaker as Emma put me on conference call. "Things we told her about missing you, about being confused, she twisted them into stories about how you damaged us. She's making money from our pain." The girls had confronted Michelle about the blog, and her response revealed her true character. She told us that everything she wrote was essentially true, even if the specific details were enhanced for dramatic effect, Emma reported. "She said we were too young to understand the psychological damage you'd caused." But the final straw came when they discovered Michelle had been secretly recording their therapy sessions to use as material for her blog and social media presence. "Our therapist wasn't even licensed," Grace said, her voice shaking with anger. "Mom found her through some online life coach program. She's been feeding our sessions to this woman who pretended to be helping us." The elaborate manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. Michelle had spent months systematically destroying my relationship with my daughters, not because she wanted them in her life, but because she wanted content for her online victim persona. Every painful conversation, every moment of their confusion and hurt, had been turned into material for her growing platform. "We're so sorry, Dad," Emma sobbed. "We should have listened to you. We should have trusted what we knew about our own lives instead of believing her lies." Grace added, "We want to come home, but we're embarrassed. How do we fix this?" I was crying too by then, overwhelmed by relief and heartbreak in equal measure. There's nothing to fix, I told them. You're my daughters, and you'll always be my daughters. Come home. The girls returned home 2 weeks later, having used their savings to pay for their own flights rather than asking Michelle for help. They looked different, older, more tired, but also more aware. The experience had forced them to grow up quickly and painfully. We spent hours talking through everything that had happened. They showed me *TS of Michelle's blog posts and social media, and I was shocked by the depth of her lies. She'd created an entire fictional narrative about our family, complete with fabricated quotes and manufactured drama. The worst part, Grace told me, was realizing that she never actually wanted us. She just wanted the story of getting us back. Once we were there, she was mostly focused on her online presence and her new boyfriend. We were just props in her performance. Emma had kept a journal during their time in California, documenting their growing realization about Michelle's true motivations. I wrote down all the things that seemed wrong, thinking maybe I was being unfair to her, she explained. But when I read it all together, the pattern was obvious. They discovered that Michelle's successful life in California was largely fictional too. She was actually living paycheck to paycheck, using credit cards to fund the lifestyle she presented online. The apartment they'd been supposed to share with her barely had room for 2 people, let alone 4. She had us sleeping on air mattresses in the living room, Grace revealed. But her social media made it look like we had this beautiful mother-daughter bonding experience in her spacious home. Everything was fake. The girls had also learned that Michelle had been telling people I'd refused to let them visit her over the years, when the truth was she'd never invited them or provided any way to make visits possible. She'd rewritten history so completely that she seemed to believe her own lies. Rebuilding our relationship wasn't instant, but it was steady. The girls were genuinely remorseful, not just about leaving but about the cruel things they'd said. They'd kept *TS of their text exchanges with Michelle, showing how she'd coached them on what to say to hurt me most effectively. She told us that the only way to make you respect our independence was to cut ties completely, Emma admitted. She said you'd try to guilt us into staying, so we had to be harsh to prove we were serious adults. I showed them the college fund statements, proving that the money was still there waiting for them. I never touched it, I told them. Even when I thought you might never come back, I couldn't bring myself to touch money I'd saved for your futures. Grace cried when she saw the numbers. We told her about the college funds, and she said you'd probably spent them on yourself by now. She said men like you always make promises you don't keep. The systematic nature of Michelle's lies was becoming clear. She'd had an answer for every possible doubt they might have had. They decided to take a gap year before starting college, working part-time jobs and helping me understand what they'd experienced. Emma got a job at a local non-profit, while Grace worked at an art supply store. They wanted to contribute to household expenses and start building their own financial independence the right way. The healing process included family therapy, real therapy this time, with a licensed professional who helped us process the trauma Michelle had inflicted on all of us. Dr. Rebecca Martinez helped me understand that I'd been the victim of what she called parental alienation by proxy. Michelle had used the girls as *P***NS against me. Your daughters were manipulated by someone they trusted, Dr. Martinez explained during one of our sessions. They're not responsible for the adult decisions Michelle made, but they are responsible for how they move forward from here. The girls took that responsibility seriously. They reached out to family members they'd hurt with their sudden departure, apologizing to their grandmother who'd cried for weeks after they left. They also worked to rebuild relationships with friends they'd abandoned in their rush to embrace Michelle's version of their lives. Emma wrote a detailed letter to her high school guidance counselor, explaining what had happened and apologizing for the way she'd dismissed the college opportunities they'd worked together to secure. She was able to defer her scholarship for a year and reapply to the programs she'd originally been accepted to. Grace decided to use her experience as inspiration for an art series about family manipulation and truth. Her paintings from this period were raw and powerful, expressing the confusion and pain of discovering that someone you trust has been lying to you. The series was eventually accepted into a local gallery showing. Michelle's online presence eventually imploded when other people she'd lied about began sharing their own stories. Her blog was reported for spreading false information, and her social media following disappeared as quickly as it had grown. The girls showed me the final post she made, a bitter rant blaming everyone else for her failures. She's trying to contact us again, Emma mentioned one day, showing me messages Michelle had sent through various platforms. She's saying she wants to apologize, but her apologies always include explanations about why she was justified in what she did. We'd learned to recognize Michelle's patterns by then. Her apologies weren't about taking responsibility, they were about testing whether she could regain control over the narrative. The girls blocked her on every platform and made it clear they wanted no further contact. 2 years later, our family is stronger than it ever was before. The girls are both in college now, Emma studying psychology with a focus on family therapy, and Grace pursuing her art degree. They chose schools close to home, wanting to maintain the relationship we've rebuilt. Emma often says she wants to help other families who've experienced parental alienation. "I know what it feels like to be manipulated like that," she told me recently. "And I know how hard it is to admit you've been wrong about someone you love." Grace's art has evolved to include themes of forgiveness and redemption. Her senior project was a series called Coming Home that explored the journey back to authentic relationships after betrayal. Several pieces from the series have been featured in student exhibitions. "I've learned things about myself through this experience too. Dr. Martinez helped me recognize that my tendency to sacrifice everything for my daughters, while well-intentioned, had sometimes made it difficult for them to develop their own sense of independence and self-worth. You can love someone completely without making yourself disappear in the process," she explained. "Your daughters need to see you as a whole person, not just as their provider and protector." I've started dating again, something I never thought I'd have the courage to do. Linda is a teacher I met through Grace's art showing, and she understands the complexities of single parenting. The girls like her, but more importantly, they see that I'm capable of having my own happiness. The college funds I'd preserved eventually paid for both girls' educations, just as I'd planned. But more meaningful than the money was the lesson they learned about keeping promises and honoring commitments. They've both said that seeing those untouched accounts was the moment they truly understood the depth of my love for them. Michelle occasionally still tries to insert herself into our lives through mutual acquaintances or by creating new social media profiles. But her credibility is gone, and the girls have no interest in engaging with her manipulation anymore. They've learned to recognize her tactics and protect themselves. Looking back, I realize that what felt like the worst betrayal of my life ultimately strengthened our family bond. The girls had to choose between truth and comfortable lies, and they chose truth. That choice, difficult as it was, proved that the foundation I'd built over 15 years was solid enough to survive even the most sophisticated attack. The experience taught all of us about the difference between love and manipulation. Real love doesn't require you to destroy other relationships to prove its value. Real love doesn't use your pain as content for entertainment. Real love doesn't ask you to choose between your own well-being and someone else's needs. My daughters are now young women who understand the value of the sacrifices I made, not because I demanded their gratitude, but because they've seen what happens when love is used as a we*p*n instead of offered as a gift. They know the difference between a parent who loves them and one who uses them. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you for witnessing how families can survive even the most calculated attacks on their bonds. Have you ever had someone try to rewrite your history to make you the villain in your own story? Sometimes the people who claim to rescue you are actually the ones you need rescuing from. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually, but the damage done in the meantime can take years to heal. Thanks for listening. Take care.